I was not always a stranger in my own family. In my early childhood, I remember my father's warm embrace when he came home from work, and my mother singing lullabies to me before I went to bed. I guess I wasn't a problem then. I was just a child. That all changed when Tallulah came along. I was 4 years old when my parents brought this tiny bundle home from the hospital. "Look, Anish, it's your baby sister," Mom said, pulling down the corner of the blanket to reveal a little red face. I remember reaching out a finger and gently touching her cheek. Tallulah wrinkled her nose and then cried so loudly that I jumped back. Mom immediately pulled me away. "Careful, Anish. Don't upset your little sister." This was the first of countless times I had caused Tallulah's tears. At least that's what my parents thought. Boulder always seemed like a town for happy families to me. When we moved here, I was 2 years old, and Kittredge Cragg, my father, was just starting a job with a construction company. My mom, Sybil, had taken a job as an assistant at a dental clinic. They were young and hopeful, and my parents often recalled weekend walks in Chautauqua Park, taking in views of the Flatirons, the famous rock formations. In those old photos, I'm sitting on my dad's shoulders, pointing at something in the distance, while my mom laughs, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand. Somewhere around the age of 6, I noticed that I wasn't being carried on shoulders anymore. All of my shoulders, knees, and arms now belonged to Tallulah. "She's younger. She needs more attention," Mom explained when I asked why we played together so infrequently now. In school, I quickly realized that studying was my only way to gain approval. Every A I brought home like the greatest treasure, holding out my journal to my mom. "Look, Mom, I got an A in math," I said one day when I got back from 3rd grade. "Very good, dear," she replied absent-mindedly, one hand stirring the soup and the other holding Tallulah, who was drawing at the kitchen table. "Tallulah, it's just a beautiful drawing. Look, Anish, what a beautiful butterfly your sister drew." I looked at 2-year-old Tallulah's scribble, which looked a little too much like a butterfly. "Yes, it's beautiful," I said, and went to my room. Later, when Tallulah went to school, things only got worse. If my sister brought a C, it was cause for celebration. "See how hard your sister is working," exclaimed my father. "She doesn't have the same learning ability as you, but she works so hard." And when I brought her another A, the answer was always the same. "Well, that's to be expected. Everything comes easy to you." Tallulah quickly learned the rules of the game. She quickly learned to cry when I refused to share my stuff, and my parents would immediately take her side. She could break my school project accidentally and receive only a mild reprimand, while I was reprimanded for getting upset over such a small thing. In middle school, I found my refuge in the computer lab. Mr. Holt, the computer science teacher, noticed my interest and allowed me to stay after school to learn programming. I created my first website at the age of 12. It was something simple, a page about our school robotics club, but I was so proud of myself. "Look," I said at dinner, showing my parents the printout. "Mr. Holt even posted it on a real server. Now anyone can see it." My dad glanced at the printout. Yes, interesting," he said without much enthusiasm. "Tallulah, tell us about your part in the school play." Tallulah immediately perked up. "I'm going to play a princess. I'll have a crown and a pink dress." "Wow," Mom exclaimed, clapping her hands. "Our little actress." I silently folded the printout and retired to my room, where I spent the entire evening perfecting my website. By high school, I was writing pretty sophisticated programs and even started working part-time creating websites for local small businesses. It was my first experience of true independence, money I was making on my own, not begging my parents for. Tallulah had become the perfect daughter in her parents' eyes, bright, outgoing, and popular at school. She practiced cheerleading, participated in all school events, and brought home an entourage of admirers. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" my mom often asked when I refused to go to a party. "You need to socialize more, Anish. Connections are important in life, and I didn't want to be like Tallulah. I loved the quiet of my room, the noise of the computer fans, and the sense of control that programming gave me. If there was a bug in the code, I could find it and fix it. In relationships with people, things were much more complicated. My only real friend was Zephyrin Olam, a strange, like her name, girl with purple hair and a nose ring. We met in advanced math class where, except for us, there were mostly boys. "You're Anish, right?" she asked one day, sitting next to me in the cafeteria. "I saw your code last week. It was cool. We've been inseparable ever since." Zephyrin was the only person who appreciated my abilities and didn't try to change me. At home, Tallulah continued her systematic destruction of my self-esteem. "Hey, computer genius," she said one day, barging into my room without knocking when I was 16. "Guess who Brock Miller invited to prom?" Brock was captain of the soccer team and the object of admiration for half the school. "I have no idea," I replied, keeping my eyes on the monitor. "Me, dumbass!" Tallulah flopped down on my bed. "Did anyone invite you?" "Oh, sorry. I forgot that you have to at least talk to people to do that." I remained silent as I continued to work on the code, but her words hit me deeper than I wanted to admit. "You know," Tallulah continued, looking at her perfectly painted nails, "you should try a little harder. Dye your hair, wear something other than those baggy jeans and t-shirts. Maybe then someone would notice that you even exist." "I don't want to be noticed for my looks," I replied, still staring at the screen. "Oh yeah, you're so smart," Tallulah rolled her eyes. "But for some reason my parents still like me better." That hit the mark. I turned to her. "Get out of my room." "Oh, did I hurt the computer geek's feelings?" She sounded surprised. "I'm sorry, but it's true. They always come to my shows, but they don't come to your stupid programming contests. Why do you think that is?" "Because you manipulate them," I blurted out. "You always make drama on my competition days to keep them with you." Tallulah laughed. "It's not my fault you're boring to them." She left the room and I was left sitting, staring at the screen but no longer seeing the code. I knew she was right. My parents almost never came to my competitions. There was always some reason Tallulah had a sudden fever, or she had an emergency rehearsal, or my mom had an emergency at work. And when I came back with another victory, they would just absent-mindedly congratulate me and then turn their attention to Tallulah. Going to college was my ticket to freedom. I got a scholarship to the University of Colorado at Boulder, far enough away from home to live in a dorm, but close enough that my parents didn't protest too much. "But why can't you live at home?" Mom asked. "We'd save money on lodging." "I need full immersion in my studies," I replied. "It would be easier to work on group projects in the dorm." The truth was I couldn't wait to stop seeing Tallulah become the center of our parents' universe every day. College was like a breath of fresh air. Suddenly, I was among people who appreciated what I could do. My programming skills attracted the attention of faculty members, and by my sophomore year, I was offered an internship at Tech Solutions, one of Boulder's top IT companies. Tallulah also went to college, but to a local community college, and continued to live at home. She chose marketing because, she said, "You don't have to think much there. You just have to be pretty and outgoing." In my third year, I met Teo Winchester. He was a graduate student and was teaching one of my cybersecurity seminars. Tall, with dark skin and brooding eyes, he was the complete opposite of the typical image of a computer scientist. "Your approach to this problem is very unconventional," he said after class, looking at my code. "I've never seen a solution like this before." "Is that a bad thing?" I asked with concern. "No," he smiled. "It's brilliant. Teo was the first person besides Zephyrin to truly see me. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I felt appreciated for exactly who I was. When I brought him to a family dinner, the reaction was predictable. "Oh, so you do have a boyfriend," Tallulah said, eyeing Teo with an appraising gaze. "And a good-looking one. How did you get him?" Teo squeezed my hand tighter under the table. "Actually, I'm the lucky one," he replied calmly. "Anish is the smartest person I know." Tallulah snorted, and my parents exchanged glances. "So what do you do, Teo?" Dad asked. "I'm finishing graduate school in cybersecurity and working as a consultant for Tech Solutions," he answered. "The same company as Anish?" Mom clarified. "That's nice. Tallulah, by the way, is also dating a very promising young man. He already works for a large marketing firm." Once again, the conversation turned to Tallulah and her accomplishments. Teo looked at me perplexed, but I just shrugged. I was used to it. After graduating from college, Tech Solutions offered me a full-time job. I started earning enough to rent a small apartment near downtown Boulder. Teo stayed over often, and we made plans for the future. "You have to break this toxic relationship," he said one day when I came home from my parents' house in tears. That day, Tallulah announced that she'd been promoted to junior manager at her marketing firm, and the entire dinner was devoted to the event. When I tried to tell her about my promotion to senior developer, my mom interrupted me to ask Tallulah what kind of car she was now planning to buy. "They're my family," I replied, wiping away tears. "Family shouldn't make you feel worthless," Teo objected. "You deserve better." I knew he was right, but cutting ties with my family seemed impossible. Despite everything, I kept hoping that one day they'd see me, the real me, that they would be as proud of me as they were of Tallulah. Zephyrin, who now worked with me at Tech Solutions, was more adamant. "They'll never change," she said as we ate lunch at a cafe near the office. "Believe me, I know. My mother spent 25 years trying to force me to be something I'm not. Eventually, I just gave up trying to get her approval." "And how do you deal with that?" I asked. "Created my own family." Zephyrin shrugged. "Friends, a partner, cats. People who love me for who I am." I was 25 when everything changed. My team had developed a new security system that brought the company a multi-million-dollar contract. I was named project manager and my name was in the local news. That was a huge accomplishment for someone my age. That same day, Tallulah called me. "Hello, celebrity." Her voice oozed sarcasm. "Mom said you were on the news." "Yeah, our project got a big contract," I replied, trying not to sound too proud. "That's nice," she said. "By the way, we're having a family dinner this Saturday. My parents want you to come." I was surprised. Usually family dinners were for special occasions. "What's the occasion?" "You'll see," Tallulah said cryptically. "Just don't be late. And yes, you can bring your boyfriend if you want." I hung up the phone with an uneasy feeling. Something in Tallulah's voice made me wary. When I called my mom, I found out that dinner was indeed planned, but she hadn't mentioned any special occasion. "Just a family reunion, honey," she said. "We so rarely get to see everyone together. Teo has agreed to come with me, though reluctantly. I'll be there for you," he promised. "If it gets too hard, we can always leave." But I wasn't going to leave this time. Over the past few weeks, I'd gathered everything I needed. I was no longer the insecure girl that Tallulah could intimidate. I had a plan. On Friday, the night before dinner, I pulled a box I'd prepared in advance out of the closet. It contained evidence of Tallulah's years of manipulation, screenshots, printouts, photos, notes. Anything that could open my parents' eyes to who their perfect daughter really was. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Teo asked, watching me check the contents one last time. "More than sure," I answered, closing the box. "This isn't revenge, it's a release." I didn't know what to expect from this dinner, but I was prepared for any turn of events. For the first time in a long time, I felt strong. No more tears, no more desire for approval. I knew who I was, and I knew what I was worth. My phone beeped. A text from Zephyrin came in. "Good luck tomorrow. Remember, you're great no matter what they say." I smiled and put my phone away. Tomorrow, everything would change. "I'll be ready." Saturday morning was surprisingly clear. The sun flooded my small apartment, streaming through the blinds and painting streaks of light on the floor. I woke up before my alarm clock and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing myself for the evening. Teo was still asleep, his breathing even and calm. I slipped out of bed carefully, careful not to wake him, and made my way to the kitchen. Habitually turning on the coffee maker, I pulled out my phone and looked through my work email. Even on my day off, I didn't want to be out of the flow of information. Work was my anchor, a place where I was valued. "Are you awake already?" Teo's sleepy voice interrupted my thoughts. He was standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "I couldn't sleep," I answered, pouring him coffee. "Nervous about tonight?" I shrugged. "Not that I'm nervous. I just want it to be over." Teo came over and hugged me from behind. "We can still cancel. Say you're sick." I shook my head. "No, it has to be done. Otherwise, nothing will change." After breakfast, we decided to take a walk along the Boulder Creek Trail to unwind before the evening. The day was cool but sunny, perfect for a walk. Fallen leaves rustled underfoot and the air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. "Something tells me Tallulah's cooking up some kind of surprise," I said when we stopped at the bridge over the creek. She sounded too pleased. "Whatever she has in store, you're ready," Teo replied, squeezing my hand. "Remember, you have your own life. You're successful, independent. Whatever happens tonight, it doesn't define you." I nodded, looking at the running water. Teo was right. Over the past few years, I'd built a life I could be proud of. I had a job I loved, friends who appreciated me, and a partner who supported me. But some part of me still craved recognition from my family, especially my parents. When I got home, I started preparing for dinner. I chose a simple but elegant black dress that I'd bought with my first paycheck at Tech Solutions. I put my hair up in a neat bun. Makeup. Minimal, but enough to accentuate your eyes. "You look amazing," Teo said when I came out of the bathroom. "Thank you." I smiled, but the smile didn't touch my eyes. I want to look confident. Before leaving, I checked the box one more time. Everything was in place. Documents, photos, printouts, evidence of years of Tallulah's game. I carefully wrapped the box in plain gray paper and tied it with ribbon. From the outside, it looked like a normal gift. "Ready?" Teo asked when I put the box in my bag. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, and we left the apartment. My parents' house was in a quiet suburb of Boulder. It was a standard 2-story house with a neat lawn and flower beds that my mom always took extra care of. When we pulled up, I noticed that there were several cars already parked in the driveway. "They had company?" Teo wondered. I frowned. Tallulah hadn't mentioned any other guests. "I guess so," I answered, feeling my shoulders tense. An extra audience wasn't what I'd hoped for. We got out of the car, and I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. Teo took my hand. "Remember, we can leave at any moment." I squeezed his fingers gratefully, and we headed for the front door. Mom opened the door before I could ring the bell. She looked festive. She was wearing a navy blue dress, her hair styled, bright lipstick on her lips. "Anish, Teo, you're finally here." She hugged us both, smelling of familiar perfume. "Everyone's here." "Everyone?" I questioned as I entered the house. "You didn't say there would be other guests." "Oh, Tallulah thought it would be wonderful to have the whole family here," Mom said nonchalantly. "Aunt Irma was coming, and Uncle Frederick and Megan, and even Grandma Grace." I felt my stomach clench. The whole family? For what? But before I could ask the question, my mom was already leading us into the living room. The room was full of people. My father was standing by the fireplace talking to Uncle Frederick. Aunt Irma was sitting on the couch next to Grandma Grace. In the corner of the room, I noticed cousins and siblings I hadn't seen in probably a year or more. And at the center of it all, as always, was Tallulah. She was radiant in a bright red dress, her long hair perfectly styled, and a smug smile playing across her face. Standing next to her was a tall, blonde-haired man I hadn't seen before. "Anish!" Tallulah exclaimed when she saw me. She flew over to me and hugged me with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you came." I awkwardly hugged her back, feeling the falseness in her every move. "I didn't realize there would be so many people," I said quietly. "Oh, I wanted everyone to be here for our big announcement," she whispered in my ear, and I felt goosebumps run down my spine. "Let me introduce you to Dexter Montgomery, my fiancé." "Fiancé?" I pulled away and looked at the man who now walked toward us. He looked like a typical man from a wealthy, family-perfect haircut, expensive suit, confident smile. "Nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Tallulah has told me a lot about you." "I hope it's not all bad," I tried to joke, but my voice sounded strained. "Of course not." His smile didn't touch his eyes, only that you're really smart. Computers, programming, and all that. "Yeah, I work in IT," I answered briefly and introduced Teo. "Oh, another computer guy!" Tallulah exclaimed with feigned interest. "You must have so much in common." Before I could answer, Mom announced that dinner was ready, and everyone started moving into the dining room. The dining room was decorated as if it were Christmas or some other important holiday. On the table were the best china plates, silverware, and crystal glasses. In the center was a huge vase of flowers, and candles were placed all around. "Wow, it's all so festive," Teo remarked as we took our seats. "Of course," Mom said, glowing. "We have a special occasion tonight." I was sandwiched between Aunt Irma and one of my cousins, Connor. Teo sat across from me, between Grandma Grace and Megan, Uncle Frederick's wife. Tallulah and Dexter took seats of honor at the end of the table, next to my parents. Dinner began with a toast from their father. "To our beautiful family gathered together tonight on this special evening," everyone raised their glasses, and I took a sip of wine, trying to calm my nerves. Whatever Tallulah was planning, it had to be something big, given the scale of the preparations. The conversation at the table flowed casually, moving from one topic to the next. We discussed the latest family news, work, the weather. I was mostly silent, intervening only when I was asked directly about something. "How's your work with computers going?" Aunt Irma asked, putting on more mashed potatoes. "Still writing those, what's his name, codes?" "Yes, I run a development team," I answered. "We recently completed a major cybersecurity project." "Oh, that's interesting," she said without much interest. "And Tallulah says she's been promoted to key account manager, and at such a young age. You should be proud of your sister." I smiled demurely. Of course I'm happy for her. Teo caught my gaze across the table and raised an eyebrow. I knew what he was thinking. No one asked about my promotion or the project that was in the local news. As usual, Tallulah's successes overshadowed mine. "So, Dexter," my father turned to Tallulah's fiancé, "tell us more about your company. Tallulah says you run your own business?" Dexter straightened up, clearly pleased with the attention. "Yes, I have a consulting firm. We help companies optimize their marketing strategies." I met Tallulah at a conference where she was representing her firm. I knew right away that this girl would go far. "Oh, she's always been very determined," Mom said proudly. "Even in high school, all the teachers said she had a great future." I felt Teo kick me lightly under the table, and I looked up at him. He said wordlessly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, though everything was boiling inside. This whole farce was so familiar. Tallulah is the center of attention. Everyone admires her, and I just existed somewhere on the periphery. "How long have you two been together?" Teo asked Dexter, trying to join the conversation. "Almost a year," he answered. "But when you know it's the right person, time doesn't matter." Tallulah smiled at him and turned to the others. "We were going to wait until dessert, but I guess now is as good a time as any. We have news." She glanced meaningfully at Dexter, who nodded. "Tallulah and I are engaged. The wedding will be next spring." The table erupted in cheers. Mom clasped her hands to her chest. Dad smiled broadly. Aunt Irma burst into congratulations. Tallulah glowed, showing off an impressive diamond ring that I'd somehow not noticed before. "Congratulations," I said, trying to sound sincere. "That's wonderful news." "Thank you, sis," Tallulah replied with that special smile I knew all too well. It was the smile of a victor, of someone who had once again proved her superiority. "I'm so happy you're here to share this moment with us." After the announcement, the atmosphere at the table became even more festive. Everyone was talking about the upcoming wedding, discussing possible venues, dresses, and guests. Tallulah reveled in the attention, describing her grand plans. Dexter mostly nodded and agreed with everything she said. "Anish, of course, will be one of my bridesmaids," Tallulah announced at one point, and everyone looked at me. I almost choked on my wine. "Me?" "Of course," she smiled sweetly. "You're my only sister. Who else would be my maid of honor?" I knew it was a show-off. Tallulah didn't want me in her wedding procession. She was just doing what was expected of her, showing sisterly love in public. "Yeah, flattered," I said, feeling the eyes of my family on me. "Great!" Tallulah clapped her hands together. "This is going to be so much fun. You know?" Aunt Irma leaned over to me as everyone went back to their conversations. "You should think about getting married, too. You don't want to be an old maid." I held back a sigh. "I have Teo. We're just taking our time." "When I was your age, I'd already been married 3 years," she continued. "And your mother married young, too. It runs in the family." "Times have changed, Aunt Irma," I replied as politely as I could. "A lot of people have careers now." Yes, yes, career, she said with a wave of her hand. But family is more important. Look at Tallulah. She has a career and will be married soon. I didn't say anything, taking a sip of wine. It was useless to argue. At the other end of the table, Tallulah was telling me how Dexter had proposed to her. It had happened, she said, during a romantic dinner at an expensive restaurant, with musicians and champagne. Everyone listened with bated breath, and I found myself doubting the truth of the story. Knowing Tallulah, it was possible that the truth was much more prosaic. What about the honeymoon? Mom asked. Any plans yet? Oh, we're thinking Bali or the Maldives, Tallulah replied. Dexter wants something exotic, and I'm dreaming of the beach and a luxurious spa. That sounds wonderful, sighed Megan, Uncle Frederick's wife. Frederick and I spent our honeymoon in Niagara Falls. It was nice, but not as fancy. Well, everyone has their opportunities, Tallulah said with barely perceptible condescension in her voice. Not everyone can afford to travel abroad. I noticed Megan cringe a little at that comment. Tallulah always knew how to subtly demean someone while maintaining a semblance of benevolence. After the main course, Mom stood up from the table. And now for dessert. We have a special surprise. She went to the kitchen and came back carrying a large cake. It was a beautiful cake, covered with white icing and decorated with pink flowers around the edges. But when my mom set it on the table right in front of me, I saw the inscription in pink icing, "Goodbye, loser." Silence hung in the room. Everyone looked at the cake, then at me, then back at the cake. I could feel the blood rushing to my cheeks, but I kept my expression calm. "What is this?" Teo asked, breaking the silence. He sounded outraged, his voice poorly concealed. Tallulah laughed. "Oh, it's just a joke. You see, Anish has always been so serious, always in her computers, and now she's finally succeeding, so it's kind of like saying goodbye to her former image as a loser." "It's a compliment." Mom smiled nervously. Tallulah said it would be funny, that you guys often joke like that amongst yourselves. I looked at the cake, then at Tallulah's smiling face. I could see the gloating in her eyes. She expected me to make a scene, to cry, to run away from the table, like when I was a little girl, when she'd break my toys or tear up my books, and then she'd look at me with the same expression, waiting for me to cry. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I smiled, calmly, confidently. "Very funny, Tallulah. Thanks for the cake." Her smile faded a little. She had obviously expected a different reaction. "You're welcome," she replied, a little confused. "I knew you'd appreciate the joke." "Let's cut it up," I suggested, still smiling. "It looks delicious." With a sigh of relief, Mom handed me the knife and I carefully cut the cake, starting right through the middle of the inscription. As I handed out slices to the guests, I caught their awkward glances. Everyone knew it wasn't just a harmless joke, but no one wanted to disturb the festive atmosphere. Connor, my cousin, leaned toward me. "That was rude of her," he whispered. "You were good not to fall for it." I nodded, grateful for that small gesture of encouragement. When everyone had gotten a piece of cake, I pulled the wrapped box out of my bag and stood up from the table. "I have a little gift for you, too," I said, walking around the table and toward Tallulah. "In honor of your engagement." Tallulah looked surprised but pleased. "Oh, Anish, you shouldn't have." "I did," I replied, handing her the box. "Open it now, please. I think you'll like it." She took the box, frowning slightly at my tone but still smiling for the guests. "Okay, let's see what we have here." She started unrolling the paper, still with a smile on her face. Taking the lid off the box, she looked inside and her smile instantly disappeared. The color drained from her face and she quickly closed the box. "What's in there?" Dexter asked curiously, trying to peer into the box. Tallulah didn't answer. She sat frozen, staring at me with wide-open eyes. Shock, fear, and something else. Perhaps the realization that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "Tallulah?" Mom asked worriedly. "What is it?" Tallulah opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. Her hands holding the box trembled visibly. There was silence at the table. All eyes were fixed on Tallulah, whose face had now taken on an ashy hue. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. "Honey, are you okay?" Father asked, starting to get up from his seat. But Tallulah remained silent, looking at me and the box in her hands. The family froze in tense anticipation, not realizing what was happening. I calmly returned to my seat and sat down next to Teo, who looked at me questioningly. I gave him a subtle nod that everything was going according to plan. The tension in the room grew with every second of silence. Tallulah looked like she was about to pass out. Dexter put a hand on her shoulder, but she didn't even notice the gesture. "Tallulah," I finally said, breaking the silence, "why don't you show everyone what's in the box?" Her eyes widened even more, if that was possible. She shook her head frantically, clutching the box tighter. "What's going on?" Aunt Irma asked, shifting her gaze from me to Tallulah. "What kind of secrets?" Tallulah finally found her voice, but it was hoarse, barely audible. It's private. I'm sorry, I have to—" She tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't budge. "Honey, what's wrong?" Mom sounded worried. "You look so pale. What's in that box?" The silence seemed palpable. Tallulah sat motionless, as if paralyzed, staring at the open box in front of her. Her face, usually so lively and expressive, was frozen in a mask of horror. Dexter, her fiancé, looked from her to me and back again. My parents froze in bewilderment. The rest of the family waited breathlessly for an explanation. "Tallulah?" Father broke the silence. "What is it? Why are you so pale?" She didn't answer. Her hands, trembling and awkward, tried to close the box, but it was too late. Several sheets of paper had already slipped out and fallen on the table. Dexter reached for one of them. "What's this?" Tallulah tried to intercept the document, but he was quicker. His eyebrows drew together on the bridge of his nose as he began to read. "Can you believe my parents still believe that I was the one who got promoted first? Anish, of course, ruins everything with her accomplishments, but I've already set my mom up to believe that her company is just handing out positions left and right." He shifted his gaze to Tallulah. "What did that mean?" Mom, sitting next to him, leaned over and took the sheet from Dexter. "Is this your correspondence?" she asked Tallulah, running her eyes over the text. "But it's not true. We never thought that Anish was promoted undeservedly." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Then why, when I told you about my promotion to project manager, did you turn the conversation to Tallulah's new position?" Mom looked at me puzzled. I don't remember that." "It was 3 months ago," I reminded her. "At a family dinner. I started talking and you asked Tallulah what kind of car she was planning to buy after her promotion." Mom looked at Dad confusedly, as if seeking support, but he had already taken another document from the box. His face turned stern as he began to read. "This is a college expulsion letter," he said slowly. "It's signed by Anish." "A forgery," I replied calmly. "Tallulah slipped it to you 4 years ago when I was a sophomore. Remember how you questioned me about why I was hiding my academic problems?" Her father looked at Tallulah, who sat with her head down. "Is it true?" She didn't answer, but her silence was more eloquent than any words. Dexter, meanwhile, picked up another document and turned pale as he read it. "This is an email. From you to the company where Anish interviewed. You write that she is emotionally unstable and prone to conflict." "What?" Mom exclaimed, snatching the letter. "Tallulah, you couldn't have done that." But the look on Tallulah's face spoke for itself. She finally looked up, her eyes full of tears. I can explain." "You can?" Father asked, and there was a coldness in his voice that I'd never heard before. "Then explain this." He pulled a small tape recorder out of the box and pressed the play button. Tallulah's voice filled the room. "It's just infuriating that she's always been so perfect. Ah, Anish got a scholarship. Ah, Anish is so smart. You have no idea how hard it is to live in your little sister's shadow. But I found a way. My parents now only see what I want them to see. They think Anish is the problem and I'm the perfect daughter. The more she achieves, the more I have to work to, put her in her place." Then another female voice was heard. "But isn't it exhausting, keeping up that image all the time?" Tallulah laughed at the recording. "Worth it, believe me. Seeing her face when her parents once again ignore her accomplishments and marvel at mine is priceless." Her father turned off the tape. A heavy silence hung in the room. Tallulah sat with her shoulders slumped as if under the weight of all her deceptions. "I didn't," she began, but fell silent, not knowing what to say. Grace's grandmother, who had been watching in silence until then, sighed heavily. She always knew there was something wrong with that girl, too perfect, too right. No one is ever that flawless. Dexter slowly stood up from the table. "I think I'd better leave." "No, Dexter. Wait." Tallulah tried to grab his arm, but he pulled away. "I need time to make sense of all this," he said, not looking her in the eye. "It's not what you think!" There was desperation in her voice. "Anish set this whole thing up to ruin our evening. She's always been jealous of me." Dexter looked at her in disbelief. "Jealous? According to these documents, it was just the opposite." He turned to the others. "Excuse me, I'll get back to you, later." With those words, he left the room. A few seconds later, the front door slammed. Tallulah turned to me, her face contorted with rage. You ruined everything." "No, Tallulah," I said calmly. "You ruined everything, with your lies, your manipulations, your cruelty." "That's not true." She turned to her parents. "Mom, Dad, you don't believe any of this, do you? Anish is just jealous of me. She wants to ruin my engagement." But her parents looked at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Mom was holding another document, a bank statement. "And this?" she asked quietly. "Tallulah, we gave you $2,000 for your grandmother's 80th birthday present. Here's a transaction to a clothing boutique on the same day." Grandma Grace straightened up in her chair. "What? But you said the silver jewelry box you gave me cost that much." "Because I paid for it," I said. "Tallulah came to me in tears the day before your anniversary saying she'd lost the money. I didn't want there to be a scandal, so I bailed her out." "That's a lie," Tallulah exclaimed, but her voice trembled. "Mom, Dad, you know me. You can't believe these forgeries." Her father slowly put the documents back in the box. "If they are fakes, why were you so scared when you saw them?" Tallulah opened her mouth but couldn't find an answer. Aunt Irma, who was sitting next to her, put her hand on her shoulder. "Tallulah, dear, perhaps you should just admit—" "No!" Tallulah shook her hand off. "I'm not admitting anything. It's all. She didn't finish her sentence, sobbing. It wasn't the theatrical tears she so often used for manipulation, but the real, desperate cry of a person cornered. Mom looked helplessly at her father, not knowing how to respond. Normally they would rush to comfort Tallulah at the first sign of tears, but now, knowing the truth, they couldn't seem to bring themselves to take that familiar step. "I think we all need some time," Father finally said, turning to all the guests. "I am sorry that the evening has ended this way." Slowly, the relatives began to disperse. The cousins and sisters awkwardly said their goodbyes, avoiding looking at the still sobbing Tallulah. Aunt Irma tried to comfort her but was rebuffed. Uncle Frederick and Megan left quietly, promising to call tomorrow. Finally, it was just the 5 of us in the dining room. Me, Teo, my parents, and Tallulah, who had stopped crying by then and sat staring at the space in front of her. "Why?" Mom asked quietly, breaking the silence. "Tallulah, why did you do all that?" Tallulah looked up, her eyes a mixture of anger and despair. "Because it was always just Anish. Anish is so smart, Anish is so talented. I could never match her, no matter what I did." "What?" my father asked in amazement. "But we have always supported you in everything. Your performances, your competitions." "Yes, but you always expected me to be as smart as her," Tallulah shouted. "Why can't you get the same grades as Anish?" "Why didn't you go to university with a full scholarship like Anish?" I was tired of living in her shadow. I looked at my sister with bewilderment. "Tallulah, what are you talking about? Your parents always put you on a pedestal. They used to skip my programming competitions to go to your performances." "Because I forced them to," she blurted out. "I purposely made drama on your competition days, but it was the only way to get their attention. Otherwise, they were always only looking at you, at your successes, at your achievements." Mom shook her head. "That's not true, Tallulah. We never compared you." "Of course we did." Tallulah laughed bitterly. "Maybe not out loud, but I saw it in your eyes, especially in yours, Papa. You always wanted Anish to follow in your footsteps, to be an engineer or something. And I was just, a disappointment. Dad looked shocked. I never thought of you as a disappointment. But you were never as proud of me as you were of her, Tallulah said quietly. So I had to create my own success story, even if it took a little embellishment. Embellish? I questioned. You lied, manipulated, sabotaged my career. That's not embellishing. Tallulah shrugged. I did what I had to do to survive. At your sister's expense? Teo asked, intervening in the conversation for the first time. At the expense of the man who helped you when you were in trouble? You don't understand anything, Tallulah snapped at him. You've always been on her side. Because I've seen her suffer because of you, Teo replied calmly. How she comes home in tears after family dinners. How she tries to get a little recognition from her parents who are too busy admiring their eldest daughter. Her parents looked at each other, confusion and pain in their eyes. They were beginning to realize the magnitude of what had happened. We didn't see, Mom said quietly. Anish, we didn't understand how you felt. Because you didn't want to see, I replied, but without anger. You were comfortable believing Tallulah's version of me. I was the troubled, withdrawn one, and she was the perfect daughter. But why didn't you say anything? Dad asked. I did, many times. But you didn't listen, I sighed. Eventually, I just stopped trying. Tallulah suddenly stood up from the table. Well, now you're all against me. As always, Anish is the victim and I'm the villain. Tallulah, no one says you are the villain, Mom said tiredly. But you've been lying to us, for years, and you hurt your sister. And what about the pain you've caused me? Tallulah shouted. Always comparing me to her, always expecting me to be the same? We never expected you to be like Anish, Father said. We wanted you to be you, but the real you, not this person you've created. Tallulah shook her head. You don't even understand now. She turned to me. Congratulations, Anish. You've won. They are all on your side. I hope you are satisfied. With those words, she ran out of the room. A few seconds later, we heard the front door slam. Mom made a movement as if she wanted to follow her, but stopped. Should I give her time? She asked uncertainly, looking at Dad. He nodded. Yes, she needs to calm down. We all do. A silence ensued. I looked at my parents, who looked 10 years older in one evening. Their world had turned upside down, and they were trying to process everything they'd learned. Anish, Mom finally said, and her voice shook. We didn't know. We really didn't. Or didn't want to know, Dad added quietly. I didn't answer. What could I say? That everything was okay? That would be a lie. Years of neglect, mistrust, and pain can't be erased in one evening. I know a simple, I'm sorry, isn't enough, Mom continued. But we never meant to hurt you. I know, I replied. You just didn't see what was going on. Tallulah was playing her part very well. And we were too blind to see the truth, Father said. Even when it was right in front of us. What now? Mom asked, looking down at the table, still covered with uneaten dinner and the cake with that horrible inscription. I looked at Teo, who nodded slightly, supporting me. Now, I said, taking a deep breath, I think we all need time. To realize what happened, to decide how to move forward. Do you still want to be a part of this family? Mom asked uncertainly. I thought for a moment. I'll always be your daughter, but I need some distance, to heal my wounds, to find my own way without Tallulah's shadow and without the role I've played all these years. We understand, Father nodded, and we'll wait as long as it takes. I got up from the table. Thank you for understanding. Teo and I should get going. Of course, Mom stood up too. Anish, we love you, we always have, just didn't always show it right. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Teo put his hand on my shoulder, and we headed for the exit. At the door, I turned around. I'll call you, in a little while, when I'm ready. My parents stood in the doorway holding hands like two lost children. They nodded, unable to hide their tears. We'll be waiting, Dad said quietly. Teo and I stepped out into the cool evening air. The stars shone brightly over Boulder, and the mountains in the distance were dark silhouettes against the night sky. "Are you okay?" Teo asked as we got into the car. I thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I think I will be." He took my hand. "I'm proud of you. What you did today took a lot of courage." "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "Just liberated, like I'd shed the heavy backpack I'd been carrying all my life." Teo started the car and we drove off, leaving my childhood home behind. I didn't know what would happen next. Whether Tallulah and Dexter would reconcile, whether my parents would forgive her for her deception, whether I would ever be able to fully trust them again. But one thing I knew for sure: I would no longer live in the shadows. I would no longer let a toxic relationship define my worth. I had my own life, my own accomplishments, and people who truly loved me for who I was. As we pulled up to my apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Zephyrin. "How did it go?" I smiled and replied, "I'll tell you tomorrow, but I think I finally said goodbye to the loser." "You know," Teo said as we walked up the stairs, "no matter what happens to your family in the future, you always have another family. Me, Zephyrin, your friends from work, people who see the real you and love you just for that." I stopped and hugged him. "Thank you. For always being there for me. For believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "Always," he said simply. We walked into the apartment, and I felt the tension of the last few hours finally let go. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it without fear or doubt. It wasn't the end, but the beginning. The beginning of a life where I would no longer define myself through the prism of other people's expectations and manipulations. A life where I could just be Anish, not perfect, not flawless, but real. And that was perhaps the biggest victory of all.